Good afternoon. Welcome, everyone, and welcome to ACCP's CSR Marketplace Virtual Program, and specifically for today's session on establishing and facilitating effective giving committees, hosted by Fidelity Investments. My name is Jean Metzger. I'm ACCP's Vice President of Membership, Marketing, and Communications, and I am so glad that you are able to join us today. For those of you who may be new to ACCP, the Association of Corporate Citizenship Professionals is a premier membership association working to improve the effectiveness of corporate social impact practitioners. We connect our members to the people, knowledge, and resources they need to to enhance the impact they're having in their companies and in their communities. Before we get started, I'd like to remind everyone that this is just one session of several that we'll be hosting this week. On this slide, you'll see our CSR Marketplace virtual schedule, and I do want to just point out that you can still register for the remaining programs this week. They are all being recorded, and we will be making the recordings available to everyone who registers. In terms of upcoming events, ACCP is committed to providing high-quality programming that shares practical and actionable insights. In addition to this week's CSR Marketplace programs, we have several upcoming programs as well, including our monthly webinars, our Impact Measurement Summit in early December, and registration for all these programs are open on our website. I also want to point out that we now have confirmed dates for our 2025 Forum CSR Intensive, which will happen in April of 2025 in Chicago, as well as our 2025 Annual Conference, which is now scheduled to be in Atlanta next September. For those who may be interested in learning more about ACCP membership, you can visit our membership page for details on benefits and pricing. And for those of you who are already members, we encourage you to share information about ACCP with your peer networks, as member referrals are our #1 source of new members. You will find sample language and tools on our Member Get a Member webpage. Now for some webcast housekeeping. We have enabled transcripts and closed captioning for this webcast. You can click on live transcripts to view the subtitles. And if you click on the caret on the live transcript and select view full transcript, you'll see the full transcript of the webcast. Chat is also enabled for you to engage with one another, as well as our panelists. So we encourage you to do that throughout the program. We also will be taking questions at the end of the program. So please use the Q&A feature to ask panelists questions. And if you see a question that really resonates with you, please click the thumbs up button and upvote the question. And with that, I am pleased to turn the presentation over to Maeve Miccio from Fidelity.
Thank you so much, Jean. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being with us today. My name is Maeve Miccio, and I lead Philanthropic Consulting at Fidelity Investments. And I'm joined by my colleague, Jen Bahus, and our wonderful client, Matt Naclerio from Assured Guaranty. You might be wondering, why is Fidelity having this conversation? Maybe you are familiar with Fidelity from your 401k or your personal investments, but you might not know that Fidelity has a lot to offer in the corporate responsibility realm. So we have my team, which provides consulting support that's both strategic and administrative. So we offer things like benchmarking and impact assessments and running grants programs. We also have Fidelity Workplace Giving, which is a technology platform to facilitate employee giving and volunteering. And then finally, we have Fidelity Charitable, which is an independent public charity, our nation's largest grant maker and donor advised fund sponsor. And through Fidelity Charitable, your company and or your employees can set up a donor advised fund for tax smart and efficient giving. And so across all of these solutions, which can work independently or together, we have partnered with over 500 companies on their giving programs. And Consistently, this theme of employee giving committees comes up time and time again, and I heard a lot about it at the conference as well. So we're really excited for this conversation, which will center around employee giving committees. And the format for today is I'm going to share some slides that really focus on some tips to set you up for success with a giving committee. And then my colleague Jen will be in conversation with Matt to talk about his experience at Assured Guaranty and lessons learned along the way. So with that, let's jump in. Want to start with kind of a shared definition around what employee giving committees are. So typically when we're talking about these committees, we're thinking about a group of employees that's diverse in nature. So representing different job functions and areas within the organization, maybe different levels of seniority, different geographic locations, of course, other elements of diversity. And this is a group that's coming together to intentionally collaborate to either inform or make decisions related to the company's giving programs. Sometimes we see that a company is maybe just starting out and the committee directs all of its giving. And then sometimes we see in other cases, maybe it's carved out to a specific kind of focus area. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. But I'd love to learn from those who are on the call kind of where you're at in your giving committee journey. So we have a poll that I'll ask Barbara to launch. Tell us where you're at. Maybe you have a committee already, or maybe you're thinking about setting one up. Let us know. And we'll just give folks a couple moments to respond there. And if you're in that camp of you have challenges, pop them in the chat so we can talk about it during the Q&A. Okay, awesome. So a good number of folks are considering one. Well, that's great. There are a lot of benefits to establishing a giving committee. So I wanted to talk about that a little bit. So of course, with the giving committee, you are setting up a really intentional way for folks to engage, giving them the opportunity to really deepen that connection, to better understand the core values of the company and their commitment to giving back. And we know within our field, right, that as a result of that, you have then employees that can serve as amazing brand ambassadors out in the community. And we also know that folks that participate in volunteering and community programs have enhanced feelings of inclusion and well-being, both social and emotional, which is great. In addition to that, though, we also see that there might be an opportunity for the employees that participate to really sharpen or build professional skills. So think about there might be more of a project management role within the committee or an internal marketing responsibility, or perhaps more of a leadership position. So that's an opportunity for employees to grow professional skills. And also, I had mentioned kind of a diverse group of employees represented. They can collaborate cross-functionally and have opportunity to connect with folks that maybe they otherwise wouldn't in their day-to-day work. Another kind of nice benefit of the giving committee is this is an opportunity perhaps to shine a light and create more visibility for folks that may otherwise be kind of in a more behind the scenes function. So they might have the opportunity to raise a hand at an all staff meeting and talk about the great work that's being done, or have a light shown on them in other ways. So there are a lot of amazing benefits for a committee, and if it's done well, these can all really ring true. However, I will say in my experience, I have seen that sometimes when there's not a lot of intention and thought put on the front end of the committee, it can go a little bit sideways. So what we want to talk about are some tips to really set these committees up for success, some considerations to think through. I think first and foremost is determining the focus area. So what is really the remit of this committee? Is the committee going to be focusing maybe on local giving at a plant or site location? Are they going to be focusing on one kind of pillar of the company's giving, doing it all? You know, what does that look like? We often advise our clients to develop a charter. It doesn't need to be, you know, exhaustive, maybe half a page long, that really articulates the scope and the purpose of the committee. And that is really helpful because it can help you get alignment both up and down the organization on what the charge of this committee will be. Another consideration is how you're going to be identifying partners or opportunities. So thinking through if this is something that the committee might want to proactively source nonprofits, or maybe you're going to have an employee nomination process or an open call. All of these are things that the committee and you can think through that will have impacts on how complex the work is, how much time is required, and the tools and resources you might need to be successful. The level of discretion is also very important. So you want to think about, is this really an advisory committee? Is this a decision-making group? What level of authority might they have to make grants? So maybe they can authorize grants up to 25K and then it needs to go to another approval process. Those are things to, I think, get ahead of earlier on. In fact, I'm right now working with a nonprofit organization that has an advisory committee, and there's a little bit of tension right now because the committee versus the staff versus the board all kind of have different ideas around this level of discretion, and it's causing some tension that could have been avoided if it was clarified on the front end, I think. And then finally is the membership. We talked about the importance of having a diverse membership, and we'll talk about some other kind of key stakeholders that might be represented. But it's good to think through, is this going to be, a curated list that is built out, or is this going to be an opportunity for hand raising and folks can express an interest and then there'll be a process to comprise the committee? So those are some considerations there in terms of the focus. And if we think about the structure and the operations, that's kind of like a double click onto some of those areas. So in terms of the leadership, wanting to think through what are the various roles that might be involved. Maybe you're going to have a chair, maybe there is a finance lead, a marketing lead. Those are things that you can come up with the committee. And oftentimes we suggest creating a short job description, nothing super extensive, maybe like half a page, just really explaining what the expectations are and what the roles are within the committee. Next up would be the decision-making process. So, is the committee going to have a conversation? Are they going to vote? How do you envision that going? How does the committee think would work best? We usually advise our committees to develop a rubric for objective decision-making, so a scoring system, so it can be super objective and transparent, something that can be easily implemented and kind of help things run pretty smoothly. Another aspect is the budget, wanting to understand, is this an annual budget? Is it use it or lose it? Does it have to be spent by a certain time? And that really leads into the key internal stakeholders that should be consulted or maybe involved with the committee. So thinking about, finance and kind of unsung heroes in accounts payable, we really need them to help be able to get those dollars out the door and into the community. And so we need to make sure we know what, materials and forms and processes are in place. Similarly, with legal and HR, they might want to review materials. And then in the next slide, talk about kind of how the membership works as it relates to someone's day-to-day job. So thinking through the internal stakeholders, I think is really important. Getting folks aligned and excited at the front end will be really helpful. And then finally, figuring out the meeting schedule and the time commitment, what will be the cadence, how much time can people reasonably expect? And all of these things are, elements to consider in conjunction with the committee. It's not something that needs to be dictated to the committee. It can be co-created, which will be, I think, helpful in sustaining the committee long-term. So I talked a little bit about the roles and responsibilities, and I think setting clear expectations around the time commitment can be really important because we want to also understand, what is the expectation for this? Is a volunteer role, like, is this on the clock? Is this truly voluntary? Is it after hours? And then how can the employees be recognized for their time and service to the committee? So for instance, is this something that they can reference in their performance review, or how can their manager support their participation in the committee? In some larger companies, for instance, we see with ERGs, when we have an ERG chair, they're receiving compensation or an honorarium for their time. So that might be something that your organization might want to consider as well. And then finally, service terms, just something to think through as you're building out kind of what that job description is. Are folks going to be serving on the committee for a year, for 3 years? What does that look like? And again, some of these things will be considered in partnership with HR, and others would be maybe something for the committee to discuss and work out. So finally, once you have had these amazing, impacts in the community, want to understand how you can communicate success. And I think another element kind of on the front end is it's important to clarify, how will you be measuring success? There's that saying, what get measures matters, right? So want to understand for different stakeholders, how are they assessing success? So maybe for your executive team, the folks that are maybe allocating funds, maybe they're looking at a certain number of indicators that would be clear measures of success for them. Similarly, maybe your marketing and communications folks might want more stories. That would be really helpful. And then finally, the committee members, what would success look like to them? How would they feel really good about the time and energy they've invested in this work? So getting some of that information up front would be helpful to make sure that you're then collecting and gathering that before it's a little bit too late or after the fact. So maybe you have determined that you want to collect an annual report from some of your grantees, depending upon the size of the grants, or maybe you bring a cohort of grantees together and have a conversation. It'll be important to kind of think about how you want to communicate out the success, not only of the community organizations, but also of the amazing committee members that contribute their time and their talent to supporting this great work. So I would be curious, for those that have a committee or maybe thinking about starting one, if you've given any thought to how you might want to measure success. We have a couple of ideas here listed in the poll, but there might be others. So let us know all that might apply to you. And we'll give folks a couple moments to respond here. Okay. Dollar amount most popular, that's great. And then number of nonprofits funded, number of people helped, those are great. Well, those are awesome because they don't require too much surveying or reporting from nonprofits, but others are saying nonprofit partner surveys. That's also really important. Want to understand not only their impact probably, but also their experience collaborating with the company would be useful as well. Thanks for sharing that. So some final tips here before we do a quick recap, just around being efficient. So there are a number of ways that we can try and be as efficient as possible, given this is, in addition to people's day-to-day work, right? So thinking about those tools that might be useful. I had mentioned the charter, maybe some job descriptions, possibly a rubric to assess giving opportunities as they come in, and then giving vehicles, might be worth determining if a tool like a donor advised fund might be helpful in being more efficient, where you can just kind of go on, make your recommendation, and then the donor advised fund sponsor can help facilitate the grant payment. Minimizing paperwork, I think, will be really helpful. This is a group that's likely not comprised of all professional grant makers, so we want to keep this simple. We also want to be mindful of the dollar amounts that we're thinking about, and want to make sure that we're asking for information that's really going to be used and read and digested. So that's important to consider. And if you need support in developing something that's right sized for your committee, we're here to help with that. Another area is considering multi-year partnerships. So if you're investing the time to identify and build great partnerships in the community, maybe consider doing a multi-year partnership so that you don't have to go through that process annually, and save a little bit of time there, and also really strengthen those relationships. And then finally, just a suggestion to keep on the docket annually, just for the committee to check in. How are things going? How's the process flowing? Are there opportunities to strengthen the process or be more efficient in the way that you're working together? So just a quick recap, some suggestions here to create clear guidelines and processes. You want to create the framework and ask the right questions, but allow the giving committee to weigh in and have that kind of co-creation opportunity where maybe you're surfacing the questions of how you want to approach things, and then they're providing the answers, and you're working together to sharpen that. Measuring and celebrating success, of course, not only of the great work that's being done in the community, but also of your awesome employees who are participating, and just being efficient, trying to keep it simple wherever possible so that folks can really focus on the fun stuff, right? The supporting community organizations and needs. So with that, wanted to offer, if you have questions or you're thinking about how you might want to implement that, a committee this year or next year, feel free to reach out to Phil Consulting at FMR, or you can add myself or Jen on LinkedIn. And then we'll also be sending out as a follow-up a companion kind of piece that summarizes a lot of this. So don't worry if you missed something or didn't catch a note. We'll have materials that support what we just kind of walked through. So with that, I'd love to turn it over to my colleague Jen and Matt, and take it away, Jen.
Thank you so much, Maeve, and everyone. It's so great to be with you today. Thank you for your time. And I'm super excited to be joined by Matt Naclerio. As Maeve sort of mentioned at the top of the session, Matt and his company, Assured Guaranty, have been working with our team over the past few years. And it's been truly a privilege, I think, to see how the company has evolved their social impact programs and grown them. And we'll get into that a bit today, but first I'd like to introduce Matt. Matt Naclerio is a managing director and credit officer at Assured Guaranty, and his work focuses mainly on the company's U.S. and international public finance and project finance businesses, which, Matt, I have to say sounds very important, so good for you. Matt also serves as the chair of the Philanthropy Committee at Assured Guaranty, and that's, obviously why he's joining us today. And then in his personal life, I know, Matt, you're also very philanthropically involved. He's the vice president of the board of directors for the nonprofit arts organization Rosie's Theater Kids. You may be familiar with that organization, started by Rosie O'Donnell in New York, and Matt's been working with them for a long time. And he's also an avid supporter of many other charitable organizations. Matt, I think very luckily, splits his time between New York City and the lovely Hudson Valley. He's a graduate of Northwestern University and a CFA charter holder. So Matt, so excited that you're with us today. I think your experience and the things that you all have done at Assured Guaranty, kind of lessons learned and best practices, will hopefully be really helpful for our audience today. And to just get started, could you share with us a little bit about what Assured Guaranty does, where your offices are located, and also talk a little bit maybe about the composition of your workforce?
Sure. Well, first off, thanks, Jen, so much for having me. It's a real pleasure to join you and just talk about this work and some of the work that Fidelity is doing. I think probably what's most important for the audience today is, we are a finance firm. We do operate globally, but what I would think is important to recognize is we are less than 400 employees. So we have a sort of broad global presence, but from an employee base, we're a little less than 400 employees. We have an office our main office is in New York with 250-ish employees, give or take. Our next largest office would be our London office with a little less than 50 employees, and then smaller satellite offices in Paris, in Bermuda, in San Francisco, and a little bit of a footprint in Australia and in Southeast Asia. So part of our consideration, I think one of the considerations in this conversation is obviously bandwidth. And how many employees do you have? How much will you be relying on those employees, and sort of where can you draw committee membership from when you're thinking about that? I'm trying to think, our current philanthropy budget, which has come up quite a bit. When we first started this work several years ago with the help of Fidelity, it was just under $1 million, and we've tripled that in the last couple of years. And I will say the buy-in from our senior management team and our board of directors, given the work we've done, given the consideration and the level of thought around our program, and the work that the committee's done, really did help to build the case to build that budget. And I think everyone's really excited with where we are today and the work we've been doing. So I think that's a good overview, but let me know if I missed anything.
No, that's perfect. And maybe so the next thing that I think would be helpful is to understand a little bit about how you have structured your programs, maybe the various components of all of your what we kind of say fall under social impact programs, including like company match and that kind of thing. And then how you've structured committees to really drive most of these initiatives, right? Like the committees are the ones that are pushing things forward.
Yeah. Yeah, so there was a concerted effort a couple of years ago on the part of the company to really beef up these programs, and the two things that came of it was a employee-led, volunteer-based committee that focuses one on D&I, which we won't talk too much about today, and the other on philanthropic giving. So what we did do is put, I think we're currently at about 14 members on our committee, including myself. And that committee is in charge of everything other than a portion of our budget that we allocate towards matching gifts. So as Jen said, we've always maintained a matching gift program. And just to give the utmost of clarity on that program, it is any qualified charity that an employee gives money to, the employee will, or Assured Guarantee will match in the same amount. There is a annual limit of up to $25,000, which I know is a pretty generous limit. Again, some benefits I think to consider. We are a smaller company, so we can give a bit more money out because we know we only have so many employees. Obviously, if you had thousands of employees, it may be harder to commit to that level of matching. So we did make an effort to increase that from 15 to 25,000 recently. So that was one of the efforts of the philanthropy committee. We thought it was time to think about an increase. It had been 15 for quite some time. The matching program when we first started was, quite frankly, the largest component of our philanthropic giving. So we were leaving it up to employees to give monies out as they see fit, and the company was simply matching that. And a lot of those gifts, I think, quite frankly, were going towards things like alma maters and a lot of great causes. But the actual corporate-led donations was a relatively small piece of that budget. And what we've gone ahead and done with the help of the committee and some of the strategy we've worked out with Fidelity is really reverse that. I think matching gifts is really, I'd say, about 25 to 30% of our total giving, with the remainder really coming from thoughtful gifts given from a corporate philanthropic level.
Great. And so the main committee, so and Matt also referred to the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, which we've kind of worked with over the years, but I think most of the things that you all do sort of have a DEI lens. You know, you're wanting to bolster that in every way that you can. But could you share a little bit about how the committees are run? You said there are about 14 people on there. I know you kind of have some subcommittees and, you know, you meet fairly often, but share some details about how like the day-to-day operations work.
Sure. Yeah, this is 100% volunteer. And what we did do, just thinking of Maeve's presentation a couple of minutes ago, is we did just we were forming a committee and we solicited employees who has interest. And then what I think is important to do, just for those of you considering it, is to recognize what skills you really do want on this committee. And the couple of things I'll flag is, right, there's always going to be elements of giving money out that require, one, compliance. Is it helpful to have a member of your compliance department on the committee who can sort of weigh in on or handle things like OFAC checks? You know, is there a conflict of interest in place? Things like that. Accounts payable, the money needs to get out the door. We want to make sure the wire information is correct, been verified, et cetera. So those skills. The other skills that I'll flag is, you know, having substantive conversations with organizations. You want people who can really hold their own, who are willing to and happy to call up an organization and say, we're looking for a partner. We really like to give a large monetary gift. We're building our philanthropic program. We want to talk to you. We want to talk about what you do. We really want to get to know you. We maybe want to come and meet you in person if it's a local charity. So I would think clearly about those skill sets. And, you know, obviously the people who raise their hand who have those skills, great. But then I would think about recruiting or going out explicitly to some people who perhaps didn't raise their hand and seeing if there's a way to convince them to join the committee, just to ensure that you have a well-rounded committee that not only obviously represents a broad representation, you know, of what your company does in terms of levels and ages and interests, et cetera, but also just functionality on that committee. On the committee, we have two sort of subcommittees. We haven't really built it out further than that. It's a subcommittee that does focus on volunteer events that runs through the committee, and looking for opportunities with some of our partners on where we could set up some company volunteer events. And then the other committees really is around corporate giving and making donations. Let me know if there's anything else that I missed.
No, that was perfect. And so you all meet fairly often, right? Like that. And so the other thing, I mean, this goes without saying, Maeve noted it, and you noted it too, Matt. Like, this is a volunteer role. So, but there is, a time commitment, and
Yep.
you all meet monthly, right?
Yep. So we meet monthly. And I think we could, and honestly, there are months where we sort of postpone the meeting. There just isn't enough to talk about. At least in our monthly meetings, what we are doing is this is a time where the committee gets together and sort of formally votes, discusses on the recommendations that are being made. So we do require approval by the committee. And then, just so everyone's clear on at least our procedures, from there, depending on the size of the donation, this is something Maeve mentioned, after the philanthropy committee approves, if it's above a certain dollar amount, it would require additional approval all the way up to senior management or CEO, CFO, COO, et cetera. So it is not as if the committee has complete purview as to where the money goes. There's some sort of checks in place. So there is a monthly meeting there just to keep us sort of regimented, discussing things, making sure we're on topic. Given that it's volunteer-based, I do think the structure really does help. The one thing I did want to mention, and I wrote it down, was just to be careful or cognizant of the way we've structured this. And I know that I'm a bit more on the senior end, and I'm helping to run the committee, but to be careful about having a true senior manager on the committee, just because people will often defer to whoever that is. And so I think it's just, we want to make sure that you have a committee that is able to speak their mind, that is able to discuss decisions openly and really express their concerns or interests on that committee, and not feel like it's simply, really just the will of whoever the senior manager is on that committee. So one thing we have done is we do have a liaison to the committee who is in a senior position in our firm. This is the head of our HR department or human capital. And I think she's been a really great advocate in the sense that she listens in. She doesn't really discuss or opine on too many of the decisions. She will sort of follow up with me if she has some input, but they're just to sort of keep an eye on things and make sure from her perspective things are running as they should. But I will just note that you want to make sure people feel empowered in this position, and to do that, you want to make sure there's sort of equal footing for each member of the committee.
I think that's such a great observation. And another thing, if I may share, that I've observed having worked with you all, is there's also a spirit of intellectual curiosity, I think, from a lot of the people that serve. And what has been at least very rewarding for me, where I sit and working with you all, is there's a really genuine feeling of like doing this well and being good partners and learning. And I think your point about, being careful about the senior leader that's there, because if we're also talking about giving employees the opportunity to develop skills, right? Sometimes it's uncomfortable to share that they don't know something, or they're, and you want to foster an environment where it's okay to be intellectually curious and it's okay to ask questions. And so I think that's a really important point, and also just something I think that's been really great with all of your team that's on there is people genuinely want to learn, and they want to do it well, and they want to be thoughtful and intentional. But I also know, from what you've shared with us, is that senior leaders are big proponents of these committees and do interact with them in other ways. So could you share a little bit more about what that looks like for you all?
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. I think I would not, as a company, seek to develop a committee if you don't genuinely have buy-in from your board and or your senior management team. So this shouldn't be looked at as a way to simply check a box or a way to offset like what you maybe, we were going to hire a full-time employee, but instead let's just make the employees figure this out. I think that there genuine needs to be buy-in from senior management. And I say that, one, because it is volunteer-based. And the only way to sort of, I think, properly incentivize and make people feel good about the work they're doing is to have the company as a whole recognize the work they're doing, the senior management sort of step up at the right moments and call it out. So some of the things that we've seen is there is absolutely consideration for this in performance reviews. It will not obviously offset, doing a poor performance in your day job, but there is definitely value added. I think what we've tried to do is utilize membership on the committee to have exposure in ways that you normally wouldn't otherwise. So we do, as a firm, have a quarterly meeting, and with the philanthropy committee, often we'll discuss an upcoming volunteer event, an initiative it's putting in place, a donation it is made, a significant donation it's made, and we will have a member of that committee make that announcement. So it's exposure there. And every time we do that, I will say the CEO of the company will call out that person and thanks. We'll recognize the committee for the hard work. Our senior management team, and as an example, earlier this year, the committee had a lunch with our CEO just to discuss what we had done in 2023, to discuss what we're thinking about in 2024. It was a thank you lunch. So again, it's an opportunity for a select group of people to sit down and have a close conversation with our CEO and in recognition of their work that I think obviously would not be happening otherwise. We also make a point of providing presentations to our board of directors around what we're doing. And those have also included, obviously, at that level, you do need a serious advocate, but also also includes members of the committee who join for that session specifically. So the level of exposure and buy-in from the company really supports the overall objectives of what we're doing, and I think gives incentives that is hard to replicate otherwise.
Yeah, I love that. So that really, I mean, those are very good tangible examples of how this kind of service benefits employees. So maybe if we look at it from the other side, how does the company, or maybe just you personally, feel that these committees benefit the company?
I think this is there's a couple of things that we do. So we have been very thoughtful in our social media outreach around our giving and our initiatives here. We do publicly disclose our committee, that we have a committee, and the amount we give. That's in our reporting. It's on our websites. I will say there is very clear value add internally. You can just from our surveys and stuff that we've done, and having these committees and getting a sense that we are in fact a company that cares about the community we live and work in. We are a company that has values and lives by its values. I think in doing this and tasking employees to sort of work on this and being very thoughtful around the communication of that, it really sort of supports that. The other thing I will say, and I just had an interview with someone earlier this week, they called out. They're like, I looked up the company. I'm so impressed with the amount of work you guys are doing and that you have a committee. And I was able to say that, I serve on this committee. I think it's harder to objectively sort of score that, but there are very much so constant reminders about having this in place and the sort of feel goods that it brings and the nice element that I think it does in supporting a company that has values and a company that's going to live by those values.
I love that. That's so good to hear. And then I have to ask on the other side, these are all the great things that come out of this, but I know there are also challenges, right? So what have been some of the pain points as you've kind of gone through setting up the committee, and well, I guess committees plural, but the giving committee that we're talking about today?
Yeah, I think do understand it's work.
Yeah.
There's a good amount of work. Giving out, going from $1 million to 3 million requires a lot of work, even if it's simply just processing, and ensuring that you're getting things correct. But you are asking employees to step up and really put in some work. The things I will say is, we often have to we are a financial firm, so we have a lot of analysts, and we have analysts on the team. And sometimes we do have to step back. We're not making a business decision. We are supporting a charity. And so ultimately we could overanalyze, a lot. But sort of letting yourself sort of live within, I think, what is the bandwidth of what a volunteer committee can really do. I think the other things I'd be really thoughtful around is building sort of protocols and rubrics and best practices. I think no one should be expected to serve on the committee in perpetuity. I think make it very clear whether or not that's public or private conversations with each member of the committee. we've really enjoyed your work. Do you want to continue next year, or is this a moment where you need to step down for whatever reason?
Right.
And so allowing that to happen so that people can sort of move on when they need to move on, given their own bandwidth or appetite for serving on the committee, but ensuring that the work you've done in sort of establishing best practice and at establishing rubrics and thoughts and around how you give and why you give and where you're giving remains in place, and you're not sort of starting from scratch all over. So there is some continuity there. I think the other things, I will say is just as you think about building out relationships, is establishing strong internal partnerships, meaning representatives from the committee or the firm generally with representatives of that organization, and just making sure there's continuity there, and you have sort of the right partnership set up. So it is work, and there has to be that level of appetite for that work. But I think, with a lot of thought, and what I will say is we were incredibly lucky. We didn't really know, we don't have an NFT at all. None of us were experts in philanthropic giving, but we were very luckily put in touch with Fidelity right away. And so that guidance there was incredibly helpful. We continue to lean on that guidance. And the one thing I will say, whether or not it's simply thinking about those best practices or specific help with, how to build out a program, or quite frankly, specific help with a specific charity you're giving to. Jen and Maeve have talked to management at a charity that we really love, just to sort of get a gut check or to understand, this is what's going on and this is how we think we could also help. The other thing I will say is there's a third party sort of buy-in, when you're making difficult decisions around giving to certain world global events, right? For example, and being able to lean on, we did vet this with Fidelity. We did look to a third party to ensure that we're doing the right thing here. We're following best practice. That has been all of those things have been incredibly instrumental in developing this. And it is a bit learn as you go. So you have to be willing to sort of allow yourself to build it and change it as you see fit. I don't think there's going to be one size fits all in how a committee works at any given company.
Yep, 100%. And, I think the example you referred to where, you were supporting a nonprofit organization that you were all very passionate about. But as you mentioned, you have folks who are really digging deep, right? They're looking under the hood and express some concern. But to you all, I think to your credit, going back to my point about folks who are eager to learn and do the right thing and be good partners, you sort of approach that in a really good way. And instead of saying, hey, organization, we're not going to fund you anymore, it's more like, how can we learn? How can we help you? These are some things that we want to help you improve on so that you also can be successful as an organization. And I just think that was a great example of, being a good partner funder to the organizations that you work with. So I think that definitely goes both ways. And then we're getting a little close on time, and I want to make sure we have some time for questions. So maybe the last question I'll ask you is, how do you measure the success of what you do?
So there's definitely, when we do I mentioned those board reports, we will talk about very tangible things: number of hours volunteered, number of employees participating in the volunteering. We do look at the number of employees that utilize our matching gifts program. Part of the goal is to ensure that everyone is well aware and is utilizing that program as much as possible. So there's those objective measures. Obviously, increasing our budget. We have specific initiatives around, and as Maeve pointed out, giving larger gifts to organizations we really sort of have strategically aligned ourselves with, and are holding ourselves to executing on some multi-year gifts. Particularly, that's one of our goals this year. So those are sort of tangible things. I think the other things that you can point to in terms of success is, we've just had, as a result of the committee, we've had we had an employee who went out to the Ukrainian border, right? And the committee was aware of this. I'm not sure if it's something, but born out of that was the idea to have him speak about that experience in connection with unveiling some support around, humanitarian aid in the region. Not something I think you would have seen come about if we didn't have a committee that was sort of thinking outside of the box, that was spending the time doing it. And, this employee was not our senior manager, but so that experience was maybe not widely known within the company. So I think there are a lot of less tangible sort of things that you can see as you sort of develop this, and you have a committee that will not be easily statistically measured, but are absolutely, I think, should be sitting in the sort of success column.
Great, that's excellent. So I see we have a couple of questions. I don't know, Jean, do you want to?
Yeah, so there's two questions in the Q&A portal. First one is thinking about the committee members and ensuring diversity for the experience. Have you seen success in giving committees with deskless employees or hourly employees? And I think as you think about your answer to this question, maybe just think like, how do you instill diversity overall in this program?
Yeah, I think again, in the recruitment process, that's where you sort of want to focus. And if the right diversity is not presenting itself, I think there is an opportunity with the right push to try to fill out that diversity. I also will say, as our committee, so we started as, I think it was a committee of 8 members. We've now brought that up to 14. That was because there was a lot of interest by employees after we were hit the ground running. So there is an opportunity to further, like, it's not set in stone day one, to further, with the benefit of having sort of the work of the committee get more publicly known, enhance the membership, and recruit to ensure diversity. Our committee, most of our meetings are over Zoom. So they are, and a lot of our satellite offices are rather small. We're a handful of employees at best. So what I will say, the benefit of that is we want to support organizations that are doing work in each region. So we do support organizations in London and Paris. We've made a donation to an organization in Australia this year. And the best way to do that is to have someone who's on the ground there and understands what's going on and where the needs are and can make that contact and speak the language. So I think relying on some of those employees that are perhaps, working or more closely, connected to certain areas is really helpful. And I don't see any reason why, anyone who's a deskless employee and is not, let's say, in person in the office or at a headquarters or whatever it might be. I think as long as everyone's up to speed on what the goals and the values are of the organization, they should absolutely be able to tangibly help make decisions around the giving of the company.
And just to add on to that, we have a couple of clients who have a very different workforce, right? That have shift workers and people who are in manufacturing environments, and they are able to successfully run giving committees, but I think they're very mindful of, especially timing, right? So when they're having meetings, and I think that goes back to one of the points Maeve made, is how do you sort of compensate for that? So if your meetings are on the clock and you're able to count the time that you're serving, and if not, I mean, one of the companies I work with, they do provide an honorarium to serve. It's not huge, but it certainly helps smooth that out. And then even things like, if you are in that environment, making sure the employee has the right tools. If they're expected to, review a grant application, do they have access to a computer where they can do that and that sort of thing? So those are some considerations, but to the heart of that question, can it be successful? I think Matt's answer, and then even thinking about different types of companies, it absolutely can. But I think many of the considerations that Maeve highlighted at the beginning, that's just stuff to think through before you jump right in.
Great, thank you. Maeve, did you have anything to add?
No, I was going to say the only other way that I've seen this play out is that maybe if you're in like a manufacturing or a retail environment, maybe the scope of for that group of employees is a little bit different. So maybe I've seen a couple of companies where the scope of that committee at that site location is focused on something that's maybe a little bit smaller, or as Jen mentioned, is more related to hands-on activities that they can do on site. And so it wouldn't be as much of, the paperwork stuff, more of like planning holiday activities and that sort of thing, and different walks and things like that. We see a lot of that in manufacturing environment, things that people could then perhaps invite their family to on a weekend. So just being mindful that there are different ways folks can engage in what's reasonable for everybody.
Great. So the next question has to do, asked you support term limits. I know, Matt, you had mentioned that there shouldn't be a responsibility in perpetuity, and you have to give people the option to say, do you want to continue? But do you actually advocate for specific term limits? And then I would add a follow-on question to that is, how do you handle sort of onboarding new committee members So there's that continuity of information and strategy.
Yeah, I think this is so for us, we don't have explicit term limits, but it's simply a gut check with what you think is going to work with your committees. Again, I think given the fact that we're a relatively small organization, certainly by comparison to many, what I will say is I think it should be 100% transparent and spoken with your committee members that there is no expectation in serving for, any given time, right? Obviously, if you're onboarding a new member, I'd say 2 years is probably, should be a base expectation. But I do think it's important that whoever the right liaison is for the committee has perhaps a private conversation or a one-on-one check-in every year. And that's how we do it. Are you enjoying serving on the committee? Do you have any feedback? Is this something you would like to continue doing? Just to get a check-in and provide, sort of a safe space where people could say, you know what, look, I've got a lot going on both at work and at home. I just don't know if I could do this in the way that I would like to, which is quite frankly exactly what we've heard from a number of committee members. And then I think also ensuring that on the reverse, you are well putting out there that if anyone has interest in participating on the committee, that they can at any given time sort of raise their hand, just so you can sort of develop a list of people who may be wanting to sort of step in and participate and sort of understanding that as well to see if there's the right moment to sort of swap people out and it's the best fit. Certain organizations, given their size, I think may benefit from genuinely a several year, term limit. That's it. I would stagger it for sure. So I would think about how to do that. And I would, again, rely on a liaison or some sort of wherever it feels right for us. It was human capital management that has continually been involved, not intimately involved, not making decisions, but really understands the procedures, the policies, the best practices, the things we've put in place. That will be a constant as the committee changes membership so that we're not losing some of that work. And again, I did say it will be work. I think documenting some of these things, the rubrics, the rationale for why we make certain decisions and what we've done, some meeting notes, things of that nature, making that available to future committee members, perhaps a handbook or a guidebook. And we have had a number of sessions with Fidelity, and there's no reason why, or I can certainly imagine if we were to have a significant rollover in our committee, once again, bringing Fidelity in for a bit of a refresh and to talk through some of the things that we've learned from them and how to sort of pass that along to new members.
And just to add, I think that was an awesome answer, Matt. And just to add, I think we tend to think of terms as like how to get fresh blood in, right? But I think the other side of terms are really important is it does promote some continuity. So, if everyone at least has a general expectation of like, if I'm going to do this, I should commit for a couple of years or 3 years, that not only makes sure you're getting new people in, but making sure you do have some of that continuity. And then the point about, staggering is really great. And if you're just building a committee, one of the ways we just recently worked with another company who did this. So the first year they had maybe 5 or 6 people on the committee. And then halfway through the next year, they added another 5 or 6. And so then you're constantly rotating 5 or 6 as terms come off. And so it's a really nice thing if you're doing it from the beginning, but maybe changing the size of the committee offers that opportunity if you've already got one started. Also, but I'm not advocating for giant, huge 50 people committees either, because that sounds very scary to me.
Well, that's wonderful. And we are at time. So I do at this point want to thank the 3 of you for sharing your wisdom with us today. I think the audience found it very valuable. I do also want to thank all the participants for dialing in and listening to the conversation. Your feedback is very important to us. So we did drop in a link to a very, very short survey in the chat, and there's a QR code on the screen. So please take the survey before you log off. It'll only take a minute or so. And with that, a reminder that we do have several more sessions today and tomorrow. So if you'd like to join those as well, we encourage you to do so. So with that, thanks everyone, and have a great rest of your afternoon.
Thank you.